So, I'm a refugee. I wish I could have been there today with you in person, to demonstrate and shine a light on the failures of our government to not only protect young vulnerable children from predominantly Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs, but also to highlight our government's failure to deport these child raping monsters from our shores. I believe that any child raping monster, if convicted, and they happen to have dual nationalities, which all of these men had, then every one of them should have their British citizenship revoked. After serving a substantial time in prison with other dirty nonce wrong-uns, they must be deported to their country of origin. No question about it, it has to happen. It's a total failure that these men are still walking the streets of our country, let alone the same city that they raped these young children in. 3 dirty, disgusting child raping nonces, Abdul Rauf, Adil Khan and Abdul Aziz, were convicted of child sexual exploitation. They were part of an organised gang that preyed upon vulnerable English children. The youngest was only 13 years of age. These men were involved in a gang that drugged and raped minors. And what is sickening to me is the short amount of time that they spent behind bars. These monsters destroyed young lives. Their victims carry physical, emotional and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. These men's sentences range from 6 to 9 years. 6 to 9 years for destroying the lives of English children. For the rest of their life, they're damaged and they get 6 to 9 years. They get out halfway through that sentence on good behaviour. Some of them serving 3 years. 3 years. It's soul destroying. It's a total disgrace and outrage to our country. There was a glimmer of justice when Theresa May, who was the Home Secretary at the time, said that these men would be deported once they've served their sentences. Guess what? That didn't happen. Tell me, how is there justice for these children whose lives have been destroyed? Not only do they not serve the full sentences given to them, but they're out walking the streets of England as free men. The victims of these men happened to bump into him. I believe it was in Asda. One of the victims, imagine walking down the street after this monster's destroyed your life, and then you bump into him in Asda after seeing on national news that he's going to be deported. 2 years later, you bump into him in Asda. Just take a second to try to put yourself in that victim's shoes. You were raped, you're beaten, you're prostituted, and you're abused by these men as a child. These men are finally sent to prison, then they're let out early. Then rather than being deported as promised, they're free to roam and do as they wish. And then you bump into them walking in your hometown. Can you imagine how horrified, how scared these vulnerable girls would feel experiencing that? It's not right. It's just not. It's wrong on every single level. There's no one, even our opposition, who are watching this can disagree with it. These young girls have been let down. They've been ignored. They've been discarded by the system and the institutions that are supposed to protect them. Clearly, their lives don't matter. And they didn't matter when they were abused, and they don't matter now. Things have to change. They must change. We keep hearing it from every single Home Secretary. You heard it from Theresa May, Sajid Javid. Priti Patel will probably give the same mouth service, but do nothing. So Theresa May kicked it all off. She stripped these men of their British citizenship. Sounded like a great idea. These men don't hold British values. They don't care for British children. So why should they have the honour and privilege of British citizenship? They don't hold British values. They do not belong here. Former Home Secretary Amber Rudd and Sajid Javid carried on with the deportation process for these child raping monsters. After a number of failed human rights appeals, the courts made it very clear. These men could be legally deported. They should be deported. That was in 2018. 2 years later, these men are still living free and probably walking the streets of Rochdale. We're probably paying for every single one of their bills. We're housing them, feeding them and clothing them in our country when they should have been deported 2 years ago. When will they bump into more of their victims? It's only a matter of time. Look how many children they raped in that town. It's only a matter of time. Institutional and systematic failures to protect children from child raping Muslim gangs. The very same institutions have failed to deport these scumbags 2 years after a legal conclusion has been reached. Why in God's name are these men still walking free in our country? Why? Because our feckless political and judicial elites have not got rid of them. That's why. Lord Pearson, a lonely voice in the House of Lords, questioned why these men have not been deported. The Home Office reply was that since 2010, they've removed more than 52,000 foreign offenders. Sounds good, doesn't it? But it doesn't address the question that Lord Pearson asked. He put to them, he asked them, why have these three men, why have they not been deported? The child rapists, why have the men from Rochdale not been deported? They should have been gone at least 2 years ago. They're still here. The fact is, we cannot trust the systems or the institutions that are supposed to protect young children and then supposed to meet our justice to those who break our laws. We cannot have foreign child raping monsters walking our streets. They must be deported now. Perhaps they should be retried in their own countries. Who knows, maybe they get a fair justice there. I'm pretty sure in some cases a death sentence is still appropriate for child rape, and life imprisonment means life imprisonment, not 6 to 9 years, with a view to parole, getting out on early release halfway through your sentence. Our country's become a joke. It's a laughing stock to the world, and it's at our expense of our vulnerable children. This stupidity, this feckless treading on eggshells for fear of being branded as racist has to stop. Laws have to change and these monsters have to go. There's no debate about this. There is no moral or legal argument to keep these scumbags in our country. Deporting these men isn't a partisan political issue. The likes of Andy Burnham, the Labour Mayor of Manchester, Bev Hughes, the Labour Deputy Mayor of Manchester, Tony Lloyd, Labour's MP for Rochdale, all of these people, Tory MP after Tory MP, they've all gone on record calling for the deportation of Abdul Rauf, Adil Khan and Abdul Aziz. Yet the Home Office has still not managed to get rid of these men. Why not? Maybe it's because there's a deep bureaucratic shadow state pulling the strings. Consider this as an example. Remember the Grooming gang report that was started by Sajid Javid? Well, the bureaucrats in the Home Office didn't want to release that report either. In fact, they said they would not release it. They said to Priti Patel. Priti Patel's on record saying that they blocked her. Our friends and our colleagues at Hearts of Oak set up a petition to pressure the government to release that report. Over 100,000 people signed that petition, forcing the government to have to discuss this issue. Now it seems they will. It took a lot of pressure to make these faceless bureaucrats reconsider their decision. We need to be angry. We need to be outraged. We need to be vocal, and we need to constantly pressure the government into taking action. If we don't, then we're failing the victims of grooming gangs. I don't want to fail victims of child rapists. Our friends and our colleagues at Hearts of Oak have also taken legal action against the Home Office, demanding these scumbags are deported and sent back to Pakistan. We don't want them here. The British public don't want them here. The victims don't want them here. So let's make sure we keep up this pressure through peaceful demonstrations, through activism, through legal recourse, and hold our government to account. For more than 40 years, children in the UK have been groomed, pimped, abused, raped, and murdered by the predominantly Muslim child rape gangs. It has to stop. And unfortunately, the only way we get to address this issue is by being proactive and exert relentless pressure on our government to deal with these scumbags once and for all. To coin a phrase, silence is violence. I know every single one of you have travelled here today. I wish I could have been here. Under different circumstances, I would have been there. But just to reiterate, I'll be back in the country in a number of weeks. I'll be back fighting with every single one of you. Keep up the fight. Keep flying the flag. Next generation of our daughters need us to.